In light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of the energy in U.S.-China policy has, for a good reason, focused on deterring a similar invasion of Taiwan. This work is critically important, and we need a real sense of urgency to accomplish it. But the military competition in the Taiwan Strait is only one aspect of the U.S.-China competition. We could deter an invasion of Taiwan and still lose our broader marathon with the Chinese Communist Party if we let them win the race for critical new technologies. After all, the CCP has a comprehensive strategy for economic and technological dominance, which relies upon a mixture of state subsidies, intellectual property theft, coercive economic practices, and the heavy concentration of industrial manufacturing in China. Now, in recent years, we've secured a number of important bipartisan wins to start to push back. Yet over the past few days, there are growing indications that the Biden administration is taking its foot off the gas when it comes to the economic side of the China competition. So, for example, earlier this week, the Biden administration made an emergency declaration that prevents the Department of Commerce from punishing what are, in effect, Chinese shell companies currently under investigation for violating U.S. anti-dumping laws. At issue here are solar panel assemblers in Southeast Asia that rely on heavily subsidized parts, to say nothing of forced labor, from China. Commerce has been independently investigating whether these imports are illegally circumventing duties designed to punish China's unfair trade practices. Essentially, Commerce is putting China on trial for its malign trade practices. What the Biden administration is saying is that regardless of the outcome of that trial, whether China and these solar assemblers in Southeast Asia are indeed guilty, it's going to give them a get-out-of-jail-free card to sell their products duty-free for the next 24 months. Now, naturally, the U.S. solar industry is not happy that heavily subsidized Chinese parts will be flooding the market. So to placate the industry, the administration is announcing an executive order to utilize the Defense Production Act to support domestic solar. This is the ultimate self-licking ice cream cone. The administration disadvantaged the American solar industry through its 2-year holiday from U.S. law for Chinese solar panels, and then it makes up for it by offering the DPA as a consolation prize. And I guarantee you it will be asking for taxpayer money to do that. This is insane. Let's remember that the Defense Production Act is meant to be used to help industry respond to national security imperatives, natural disasters, or other true emergencies. Offering the clean energy industry an olive branch after, in effect, greenlighting Chinese subsidies of solar panels is not a national emergency. Taxpayers should not be on the hook to make up for the Biden administration's reckless energy policy. If the administration simply enforced existing law and let the Commerce Department punish Chinese wrongdoing, and again, their reliance on slave labor, it would not have to leverage so-called emergency authorities that seem to be utilized more and more often. We're in a constant state of emergency. That's not all. Just last week, the administration notified U.S. investors that they would not have to divest stocks and bonds of Chinese military companies. This weakens a Trump administration action designed to ensure that American capital is not directly subsidizing the worst of the worst Chinese companies, many of which are state-owned enterprises that directly support the People's Liberation Army, which is trying to take over Taiwan militarily. This is now the second time that the Biden administration has weakened restrictions on U.S. investment in these Chinese military companies. It's a handout to investors who are directly profiting in the form of dividends from the capital that they have provided to America's adversaries. All Americans should have the right to invest their hard-earned money in the stock market to safeguard their financial future. But this does not need to include the right to profit from investments in Chinese defense contractors, which may help facilitate new military capabilities that will one day be used to kill Americans on the field of battle. Third, and this may be the biggest deal of all, indications are that the Biden administration is set to roll back some of the Section 301 tariffs on Chinese goods that the Trump administration imposed as a direct response to the CCP's malign economic practices. As the administration's runaway spending drives inflation to near record highs, the Biden team has become desperate for a way out. Some in the administration have convinced themselves that the tariffs on Chinese imports are part of the inflation problem. Others, like USTR, Catherine Tai, disagree with that. In fact, as a bipartisan group of senators noted the other week, since Chinese imports make up only 2% of goods in the Consumer Price Index, cutting tariffs would not materially reduce inflation, which also tends to be highest in areas like fuel and food, where we don't import much from China. So cutting tariffs will not combat inflation. What it will do, however, is serve as a unilateral concession to the CCP in the complete absence of any sort of improved Chinese behavior. Even worse, it will send the worst possible message to many Western companies, which have increasingly been looking for a way to reduce their manufacturing footprint in China. As we've seen in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, being economically dependent on authoritarian adversaries will not end well. The 301 tariffs have provided industry with a powerful incentive to diversify their manufacturing footprint and reduce overall dependencies on China. Rolling back these tariffs would just give big businesses an excuse to continue their heroin-like addiction to the Chinese market while putting our national security at risk. I say all this because these moves, taken individually, are not exactly generating many headlines. They're obscure decisions on complex issues that don't lend themselves to sound bites. But policies like these are the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day competition for economic superiority. And right now, the Biden administration is unilaterally taking steps that will reduce American competitiveness and expand the CCP's leverage to hold our economy hostage. So when push comes to shove, and I'm increasingly concerned it will, I promise we will want the CCP to have as little power to coerce us as humanly possible. These moves that the Biden administration is making instead move us in the opposite direction, and I'm deeply afraid we will all pay the price. So let's learn from our mistakes and reverse these decisions before it's too late.